G'day guys, welcome again to 100 Lessons from the Legends here. We're going through the greatest fighters of all time in chronological order and taking a lesson from each one. Still in the very much early phases in the 1900s, and Barbados Joe Walcott, one of the greatest giant killers in boxing history, one of the greatest pound for pound knockout artists in boxing history. He was a 5'2" welterweight, very short, stocky guy, and one of the shortest welterweights you'll ever see, but he still went up and took on and knocked out former world light heavyweight champion George Gardner. He knocked out a guy who was a very good heavyweight for a long time, although it's still a very small heavyweight, but still a heavyweight, in Joe Chewinski, who was a guy who knocked out Jack Johnson very early in Jack Johnson's career. If you don't know who Jack Johnson is, he was the first ever African-American heavyweight champion, and at the time, I would say the greatest heavyweight of all time when he first showed up and won the world heavyweight title. I think he's the most dominant heavyweight champion that the world had seen in the brief history of the world of boxing at that time. But we're going to dig into how on earth did Barbados Joe Walcott have such great success against bigger guys, and even when he fought a guy who we've already talked about, the old master Joe Gans. Joe Gans was a lightweight coming up to welterweight, but this height difference was like 7 inches. It was in Gans's favour. So it looks really funny when you have the welterweight taking on the smaller guy in Joe Gans, and you've got Barbados Joe Walcott just looking up to Joe Gans in the way, and it's like he's the welterweight. But there are some advantages to being this much shorter than your opponents. And typically it does make fighting a lot harder if you're fighting someone taller with longer arms and their head is way up there. But what you can do is embrace it, basically. Make life a lot easier for yourself by leaning into the skid at times. So what Barbados Joe Walcott would do, one of the techniques that allowed him to knock out these bigger opponents, was he would basically get down and get down even lower. So he'd come from a squat position like that, making himself even shorter. What this does is it makes the taller guys, when you're throwing a jab, for instance, you throw a jab like that. Here, I'm protecting the side of my face as well. So if guys come around with a right hook, they'll hit my shoulder and hopefully glance off the top of my head. Same with the right hand is exactly the same. As you throw these punches, your shoulder is essentially at the end of the punch, your shoulder is protecting the side of your face. This is the vulnerable part here. Your forehead can take a fair bit. It's the face, the jaw, the chin. That's what you're really trying to protect. However, if you start having to punch down like that, suddenly your face is not being protected as much. Your arm is coming lower, and if you have to punch down like that, all this is now vulnerable. So if your opponent can get so low that they can make you punch down, leaving the side of your face open, they can then throw right hook, left hook over the top of your punching arm, and they're actually going to connect with your face. They're not just going to connect with your shoulder or glance off the side of your head. That's how these knockouts can happen. And that's how these smaller guys can knock out bigger guys, like Barbados Joe Walcott did. Barbados Joe Walcott had several classic fights with guys, and pretty much all of them were taller than he was. Even guys like I mentioned, Joe Gans, who were technically lighter than him. And he had so much success. He was an absolute giant killer and one of the greatest giant killers boxing has ever known. And that is one thing you can do, is lean into the skid, get down nice and low so your opponent has to actually punch downwards, leaving their face exposed when they do throw punches, so you can come up with counter punches as they throw theirs and knock them out. It's the best way to knock people out, and we'll get into more later on, but counter punching, you are getting them when they least expect it, getting them when they're not ready to protect themselves, and getting it when they're also moving towards you as well. So if you're creating that actual collision where both your punch and their head are meeting and hitting head on. Because with boxing, you do find people are really good at rolling with punches. They're really good at just moving with the punch and taking a lot of the sting off your punch. This is the way to do it, and Barbados Joe Walcott was a master at it. And we'll get on to the next video because we have so many legends to get through, but that was a little tribute to one of the greatest giant killers of all time, and we'll see you guys in the next video.